Good morning. I decided to come on today because everybody's getting back prepared to go back to school. So I want to continue to talk about making sure that you are educating with a purpose. I shared last time that so many of us think of education in a very linear sense, as a very straight or connect the dots kind of way. And the reality is, education actually takes place, happens, and produces learning much differently for individuals with disabilities. So, if you are parenting a child with a disability or a child that needs extra support around education and learning, it is super important that you are very strategic about how that education takes place. So before I jump in to the topic, I am going to take just a few minutes to talk more about who I am, what I've done, and my experience. I'm looking at this live, trying to work it and trying to stay focused at the same time. I will be the first to share that in my house, we are neurodivergent. I'm the ADHD person that's highly distractible, short attention span. I can go down a rabbit hole real quick. And then I have a learner that's on the autism spectrum. And then I also have a learner who is impacted by a traumatic brain injury. And then I also have a traditional learner. Now, I'm going to say this in love. I also feel like I have an undiagnosed learner in my house who's sitting watching. That would be my husband. He doesn't have a diagnosis,
Really?
but my argument is just because he doesn't have a diagnosis doesn't mean he doesn't have one. So technically, in my opinion, everybody in my household except for one person has a diagnosis, except for including my undiagnosed husband. I've diagnosed him. So he's a learner with disabilities too. Anywho, so I am Latasha Barr Lewis. I am one of the co-founders of Cam's Coffee. Cam's Coffee was the first organization in my area developed specifically to provide employment opportunity to individuals with disabilities. In that organization, which we've run for the last 9 years, we provide various types of supportive employment. My background is education. We also provide other types of educational opportunities for individuals with disabilities. And so I've spent the last couple of years in various types of educational settings, supporting learners with disabilities and helping them get from point A to point B. So everything that I share really comes from three different places as far as experience. I'm a mom raising learners with disabilities. I'm a professional working with learners with disabilities. And then I'm also a community member creating an ecosystem. And so I kind of see the various aspects in different ways. And so when I show up to the table, I try to show up in a way that speaks to all those places, to help empower families to accomplish whatever it is that they need to accomplish. For us, we saw entrepreneurship as the key to a successful education for one of our children. The reason I say it that way is because the whole point of this conversation is going to be around the purpose of your child's education. And you have to decide what that purpose is in order to make educational decisions that push them in that way. So, for example, we have a learner in our household who said early on that he wanted to attend college. That's my learner that's on the spectrum. He identified that college is his goal. So we created an educational path for that to happen. He leaves for college in 2 weeks. My nerves are shook. If you could have seen me at open house walking back to the car, I cried like a baby. But nonetheless, we have achieved the goal of preparing him to go off to college, not just get accepted into college. That's another thing that I share with parents with children with disabilities, not just to be accepted, but to be prepared for education and learning on that level. We have the other learner in our house who we are aware that he will probably never go to college. Could he possibly take a college course or maybe do a trade? Possibly. But we were honest and real about that early on in this journey. So because of that, we had to decide then what was education going to produce for him. If we know that college is not the end goal, then what is the goal of his education? And we set 3 primary goals for his education. That education needs to teach him how to live independently, give him a sense of independence. That education needs to give him the skills that he can have a decent income. And that education for us needs to teach him how to have impact in his community. Those are the 3 pillars of his education. If you notice, none of those 3 pillars are education based. The 3 pillars are around the adult, the young adult, the human being that we're trying to produce. Because education should be used to produce a result. And many times as parents, we have not defined whether your child has disabilities or not. We have not locked in and identified what education needs to do for the learner. We simply just say they need to learn. Okay, well, learn what? Learn what and why? The reason that is important is because different learners have different capacity. And what you do for a learner that has this much capacity and what you would do for a learner that has this much capacity should not be completely identical. What happens in special education, and hear me, I'm an advocate. I go with families. I sit at IEP tables. I write IEP. Like, I understand the process. I understand the methodology. Typically, what happens in an IEP is the curriculum for a student whose capacity is this much is modified for a student whose capacity is this much. Because the thought is, if we take everything we're doing over here and we just modify it in smaller amounts, smaller ways it's implemented, then it's adapted for the learner with a different capacity. And on surface level, in many ways, that's true. But in most cases, what's really needed for the learner with this much capacity is totally different from the learner with this much capacity. And so the way I view education, when we're creating programs, when we're creating employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities, is I look specifically at where are we trying to go. And if a family has not made that determination, that's the first thing we do. Determine, what does this experience, what does this education need to produce? I'll give you an example. In my state, 4th graders spend the entire year in different subject matter, learning all about our state. The state bird, the state seal, the state song, the capital, all the things that are important, the different types of terrain in our state. And it's wonderful. If your learner has the capacity to take that in, process it, apply it, activate it, as well as taking in more critical information, right? But if your learner has a limited capacity, meaning how much information they can take in, how much information they're going to be able to activate and process, do you want that information filled with stuff that doesn't necessarily produce the outcome you need? I have never been asked my state bird in an interview. So if you have a learner with limited capacity, is that the information you want to fill the bucket with? And for me, the answer is no. So to be more specific, in different seasons in my learner who needs the most support, in his life, we have done homeschool, private school, charter school, private school, whatever we need to do in that season, because I'm adapting the learner to the 3 core goals that we are trying to do. Adapting his environment, his education to our 3 core goals. And if you weren't here earlier, the 3 core goals are: he needs to be able to live independently. He needs to be able to earn a living, not get a job, because that's not the same thing. He needs to be able to earn a living, and he needs to have impact in our community. So, do we need to learn the state bird? We don't need it. It would be great if he had the capacity to include that, right? But he does need to know how to cook. He does need to know how to clean. He does need to know how to wash clothes. He needs to know how to bake, like all the basics. Then on top of that, he needs skills. He needs to learn skills that garner a certain wage. That's not getting a job. And as someone that provides supportive employment and employability training for individuals with disabilities, I can tell you that that's a whole nother argument in itself. Because what happens in employability programs is individuals with disabilities are given basic tools. Those tools include getting to work on time, personal hygiene, getting along with your coworkers, manners, all the basic things, right? I know people who aren't nice and not kind who make a lot of money. I know people who don't get along with their coworkers who do really well professionally. Am I saying manners are not important? No. What I'm saying is those skills don't necessarily help you provide an income that allows you to sustain a life as an adult, which is why we see so many individuals with disabilities not using their full capacity as it relates to employment. It's not that they can't. They haven't been given opportunity. They haven't been provided support. And they haven't been provided the right tools to max out their capacity. Right? That all starts with a very targeted education. That all starts with the awareness of this learner needs to learn in a way that's going to impact them here, meaning 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And you have to start thinking about that here. When a learner is 7, 6, 5. Cam said to me at 8 that he wanted to be able to live in his own house. Never forgot it. And you don't have to tell me but one time that you want to be able to move out. That's been our shared goal. He wants to move out, and I'm going to make sure he's able to move out. So at 8 years old, we're preparing for move out that may not happen till 25, 26, 27. But we're preparing for it 20 years before. And that's important because if your learner has a limited capacity, how long it takes you to impart certain skills, knowledge, ability, repetition, it takes the additional time. So back to the point of my live, and that is, as we are entering into the new school year, seriously sit down and think about, what does the education that your learner with disabilities need to receive in order to produce an outcome? And the first step for you is to identify what that outcome is. Someone said in the comments, let me go back so I can see it. My youngest just got an IEP, and my oldest 20 should have, and not in the 3 core goals. Put a comment back in so I can better understand what you're asking, because I'm a little confused, because I want to make sure that I'm able to help. as it relates to an IEP, understand that they are not going to structure the IEP based on your three core goals, right? Because it'll take other things to meet these goals. The three core goals that I mentioned, for those of you who have just joined, I shared that my son that needs the most support, he's currently been homeschooled, but we've done private school, charter school, homeschool, you name it. He's done them all. But we have three core goals for his education, and that is he needs to be able to live independently. He needs to be able to earn an income, not have a job, because there are lots of jobs where the income won't sustain him. He needs to earn an income to be able to provide for himself, and he needs to have impact in our community. Those are his three core goals. And then we build an education. Even when he was in public school and he had an IEP, we make sure that the education that's taking place directly supports the three goals that we have identified. And the only way you can do that is to sit down. I have some videos that are pinned at the top of my profile, and where I share that every parent with a child with disabilities needs an education plan. In that video, I share what that plan should consist of and how you can do it. But the whole point of that plan is for you to identify the three things. And hear me, this process, it should be ongoing, especially as your kid starts to get older. They should have input into that process. So we're constantly retooling. And even though how we do it, what it looks like has changed some, for the most part, our three goals have remained the same. Gotcha. She said my oldest should have had an IEP. School didn't want to. Now he can't fulfill the three core goals. Got you. Let me just say that it is harder when they're older, but there are things that we absolutely can do to start to lay a foundation for success. I often have young adults come in to work with us at CAMS, and they may be 24, 25, 26, and many of them are missing some of the core, some of the basic foundational skills that they need to be successful in the workplace, independently, and as a young adult. And a lot of that comes directly from the education that they received. And I also understand, being both a parent and an educator, that lots of times parents just don't know what they don't know. And that's just the truth. People just don't know what they don't know. So my goal is to come on, to share more, to impart more, to ask questions. I do have a free parent group called Empowered Pathways, where there's lots of information in there around IEPs, homeschooling. We run a social enterprise, and that social enterprise, of course, is owned by Cam. It's designed to be the way that he's able to provide for himself, while also creating opportunities for others with disabilities in our community. So if you notice, CAMS fulfills three of the primary goals of his education: to be able to earn an income, to sustain himself, and to have impact in our community. So we used entrepreneurship as a way for him to fulfill two of those things. We also use it in ways to help build his independence. But all of that starts with understanding where you want the learner to get to. What is the goal? You shared, let me see, my youngest is 4. He has an IEP. Teacher asked about goals for the year, and I was clueless. I completely understand, especially if you are, this is the first time you've experienced an IEP meeting. The meeting in itself can be significantly overwhelming. The jargon and the language used sometimes can be a barrier. The quality of the educators or the IEP team, all of that impacts your experience. In my free parent group, Empowered Pathways, there is a free class on an IEP. It is self-paced. You go in, it totally breaks down the IEP process, what it's supposed to do. There's some free downloads for tools that you can use to show up at the IEP table with. It teaches you how to build a binder to support yourself through the IEP. It just has a wealth of information in there. It's information I use when I advocate for families or when I get a call about a family that needs support. I make those same tools available for individuals in the community and anywhere completely free. So there's lots of support for you around the IEP process in that free parent group. What I'm going to encourage you to do today, since the goal question kind of caught you off guard and your learner is 4. So sometimes it's hard to really start thinking now about your learner as a young adult because we are overwhelmed so much with what's currently happening in our lives, the therapies, the appointments, behavior challenges, if any exist. All of those things can impact how we're showing up as a parent. And sometimes we're just surviving, right? Been there, done that. Sometimes we're just surviving. But I share with parents all the time that the choice in this process is this. You can either show up today and give everything you got now, right? Or you're going to have to continue to show up now and later if you don't prepare your learner in a certain way. I also just want to, thank you so much. I'm glad you found me too and hear me. You can send me a message. I'm happy to answer questions specifically. If you have more specific questions, I'm happy to do so. All the statements that I make are general statements. They're the middle of the road because everything won't apply to everybody's learners. Some of you have learners that are have a high level of support. Some of us have learners that are middle of the road, and some of us have learners that are low support. So I'm speaking kind of middle of the road, but everything I'm saying can be adapted based on who and what your learner is. Will all the learners be able to move out and live independently? For some, no, that's not a reality. Will all the learners, like I have a learner on the spectrum who's headed to college, is that the reality for every family with a learner on the spectrum? No, it's not. But what is possible for every learner with a disability is that their full potential can be reached, whatever that full potential is. As parents, as educators, as part of the team, our goal is to equip the learners in a way that they max out at their full capacity. I shared in my last live, and I think this is number 3, so there's not a lot, that what I see when learners with disabilities who are between the ages of 20 and 25 come to CAMS for the very first time, and we're either taking an application or we're learning more about the learner and their family. What I find is that many of them have not had opportunities to max out their capacity. What I mean is lots of times parents and educators make assumptions on what a learner can and cannot do. I assume nothing. We're going to give you every opportunity there is, right? Because it's the one way to find out what you actually can do, not what the assessment says, not somebody's opinion. It helps me to see exactly what you can or cannot do. Then our next job is to build capacity, right? We build capacity and then we apply expectations to the capacity that we build. The reason that's important is because many parents make the decision for their learner not based on what the learner actually did, but based on perception. I'll give you an example. I use shoe tying as a very basic example. Many parents won't allow their learners to attempt to tie their shoes because they know that they'll never be able to fully tie their shoes. A fully tied shoe is a shoe where you've done the beginning, you've pulled it, whether you use bunny ears or one loop, you make the loop and it's done. I think completely opposite to that. I think you max out at whatever part you can do. My youngest son has a brachial nerve injury to this arm. So he's been in and out of therapy for the arm, working the arm. So any sorts of movements is actually why we chose coffee as his hobby, but long before we opened the business, because handing people a cup of coffee is how he worked the arm. It was very specific. Anywho, so making the loop to pull is extremely hard and is one of the tasks that he may never accomplish. So does that mean we throw out shoe tying altogether? Absolutely not. That means you learn and you max out in your capacity in that process, right? And you include parts and steps in the process so that we can achieve success. So shoe tying starts with putting your socks on. We got that? Check. Shoe tying success starts with putting the shoe on yourself. Just because you can't tie the shoe don't mean you can't put the shoe on. Socks, shoes, next. The next part of shoe tying is just being able to make that one loop and pull. Right? For years, that was the capacity. That was as far as he could go. That's as far as this injury would allow him to move. Just being able to make the initial pull. Then that's where we stop for now. And then we work on the next steps. But you'll never know that if you just say, I'm going to tie the shoes. Build capacity. And just because you can't fully complete the full task, it doesn't mean you shy away from the task. It's no different than cooking. If your learner can't actually use the stove, well, how much of the prep can they do? Can they not pull out the eggs, the cheese, the bacon, section it off for you to use? Meaning, okay, we got 5 people in the house. Everybody wants 2 eggs. Can they not say, Mom, pull out 2 eggs. Dad, pull out 2 eggs. Brother, pull out. Capacity building. But many people won't go that far because they'll say, well, he's not going to cook. So we scrap the majority of that process. And unfortunately, what happens when we show up that way is I now see a learner with disabilities who's 24 and 25 and still needs support like they did in 8 and 9, not because they don't have the capacity, but because they have not been educated, supported, and empowered to do more. Hear me very clearly when I say there's a difference between what your diagnosis impacts and what parenting and education impacts. Because a diagnosis is the list of what's there. The education and the parenting then takes said diagnosis and determines how we're going to get from point A to point B. And many times what happens is we settle for what can't be done. And I believe in maxing out what can be done. Because when you max out what can be done, you will discover more potential usually than what's been said in an assessment and standardized testing and evaluations. Because those are tools, right? And they're designed to understand certain aspects of the learner. Once those things are identified, it doesn't mean that's the full extent of the learner. It gives you a place to start to build capacity. I can dive into education and behavior. They overlap. They overlap for certain. I will do another one on building discipline or correction for learners with disabilities separate from this one, because that's a rabbit hole in and of itself. But If you don't provide opportunity, you can't create and max out capacity. And the reality is, educating and parenting this way is the long road, which is why so many people don't do it. It's also not necessarily instinctive. It's something that has to be taught. For example, I'm willing for it to take 2 years to see the outcome of a goal that we have. Because I understand that if we invest in the 2-year process, what it's going to do for my learner 5 years from now. I'll give you an example. So Cam is impacted by traumatic brain injury. So self-regulation, mood, emotional intelligence, all of those things are impacted by his injury, right? We could have chosen to be frustrated about the 7-year-old Cam, or understand that it was going to take a long-term plan for 7-year-old Cam to become, he'll be 17 tomorrow, to be 17-year-old Cam. Today, after I get off this live, I'm going to post a video of Cam talking to a summer camp that just so happened to come into the coffee shop yesterday, not knowing our story, not knowing that he's a 16-year-old entrepreneur running a business. They just so happened to come in. But to see him tell his story to that group of, they were probably in grades 5 through 8, to see him tell his story to those young people is what this process is all about. All about. It makes every struggle, it makes every sacrifice, and I've made many. It makes it all worth it to see him stand in front of a group of 20, 30 kids and explain his journey, his process, and his impact in our community. He's running his business. He had employees working that day. I was there sitting in the back. His brother was actually running as team lead. He's 18. That's my learner on the spectrum. To see these kids in action is what this entire process is all about. To see my kids, both of whom have diagnosis, run a business, earn an income, employ others with disabilities, that's what this process is all about. Did it happen overnight? Absolutely not. Have my husband and I made lots of sacrifices to support them in this process? Absolutely. Absolutely. So the example that I was about to give about the long road and putting goals in place that are going to take steps to build his capacity, because he has issues with his emotional regulation, or had. I feel like now at 17, we really crossed that one off. He used to run in his room, slam the door, and completely demolish that room. And in a certain season, that was acceptable because we're building capacity. Once that was over, he had to completely clean that room. And then we talked about how he felt, what triggered him. Of course, we used aged appropriate language, how he responded, why he responded that way. And we talked through more appropriate responses, and depending on the scenario, there may even be consequences. Depending on what happened, how it happened, there may be consequences. Just because we're talking through it, we're understanding, we're shaping, giving him space to express emotion, understand emotion, doesn't mean you're void of the consequences of your actions. So that was acceptable for a season. Then, to build his capacity, the rules changed. If you feel X, Y, and Z, you absolutely can go to your room. Don't slam my door. And do not tear up that room. This is a tool. You can beat your pillow. We give other alternatives to express the feelings. But tearing up the room is now off the table. And over the years, as we give him capacity, meaning he's in therapy, to help him understand how he feels, why he feels that way, and appropriate responses. We support that process. So over the years, what's allowed changed. And now he may go to that room, no slamming, nothing's destroyed. He gonna huff, he gonna puff. Wait a minute, my husband's in the background saying, yeah, now he just ain't gonna clean the room. It don't have nothing to do with his emotions. Be quiet. He said, now the room just dirty. It don't have nothing. It don't have nothing to do with nothing. I'm gonna put you out, and you're not gonna be able to be in here. I'm being professional, and stop bothering me while I'm being professional. Anywho, it's a real statement though. His room at any given moment is a mess, but he has grown and we built his capacity. So as we built the capacity, the expectations evolved. What happens is we get so frustrated at the behavior that we see now that's unwanted that we can't or have a hard time building a plan. Like I said, plan could take a year, it could take 2 years. We get so frustrated that we have a hard time committing to a process and understanding a process. And I do also understand how thinking that way is not necessarily intuitive, and then having someone support you through that process is one of the things that I absolutely do for parents in my free parenting group. Help you think through processes, identify steps, what we could do, long-term goals. Like sometimes it's so hard because of all that we're dealing and supporting with now. It's hard to think about where you want to be with that learner in 2-3 years, and realistically, right? And so understanding that it's hard to commit to that full process because right now, today is so hard. Does that make sense? Got it. So what I want to encourage you to do again before the school year starts is to seriously sit down and look at the learner that you're facing today. I want you to think about who they are in its entirety, meaning what are the places where they need the most support right now, whether that's educational, behavior, emotional, whatever category. Where does your learner need the most support right now? Where does your learner have the most potential right now? Meaning, these are the places where they're growing or they have the ability to grow in this particular area. Where do they have the most potential, and what could that potential produce this school year? And then also think through where your learner is doing well right now. And the reason I say to do it that way is because at least 2 times a year, you should be looking at your learner in their entire capacity. Not just what an IEP says, not just what their diagnosis and whatever your therapist and members of your support team, but for you to sit down and fully look at your learner in their entirety. Because it is the only way that you can successfully advocate is to understand your learner, right? I would also suggest that you look at how your learner's disability impacts them in multiple environments. There's a reason when the evaluation tool slips my mind, but and it's standard, they get 3 people to fill it out. They get a teacher, they usually get the doctor, and then they get the parent. And that's because they want to assess that learner in 3 different environments. You want to do the same thing. You want to understand your learner and how they're impacted by their disability in multiple environments, not just at home. So you want to look at your learner, make those categories, make those lists. You want to understand how your learner is impacted by their disabilities in multiple environments, right? And then you want to make sure that you want to differentiate between what is impacting your learner directly to their diagnosis and what things are impacting your learner because of environment. I'm a parent. We're all guilty. The son in my house that needs the most support is also the baby. He's also, when he was little, he was my cuddle partner. And at times, my husband has to give me a reality check about what's impacting him based on his diagnosis and what's impacting him because he's his mama's baby. And they're not the same thing. And to adjust myself accordingly. Do I want to hear it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Is he right? 2 out of 5, he's right.
5 out of 5.
Yep, 5 out of 5, my eye. 2 out of 5, he's right. He's not the professional, I am.
You never want to be wrong.
How does he know I'm the professional? No, but seriously, you want to make sure and you want to be able to evaluate any, and sometimes our parenting can be barriers, right? So you want to identify all the barriers that exist for your learner to reach their full potential. All right, so before the school year begins, here is your homework once again. And if you have questions, feel free to DM me. Also jump over to Empowered Pathways, which is my free parenting community, where there's lots of resources that may already address some of the questions you're going to ask. I am going to take the time to put every free resource available in my bio. I haven't done it yet because it's a lot of them and I just need to pull them together. But I'm going to put in my bio all of the free resources around IEP support, homeschooling kids with or learners with disabilities. And I'm starting to make resources on how we use entrepreneurship to connect homeschooling and making money, being able to provide for yourself. We've done that for the last 9 years. We're actually opening a second location. It's scheduled to open the end of this month, so we're super excited about that. But anywho, as a parent, here is your homework. Between now and the next live, I want you to make the checklist or make the list showing the places where your learner needs the most support, the places where your learner has the most potential for growth, and the places where your learner is currently thriving. You want to be able to look at all 3 of those things at one time to create a full picture, a well-rounded view of your learner, right? Then you want to sit down and make a list looking at these 3 things, right? You want to fully understand how much of that is impacted by your learner's disability and how much of that is impacted by other factors. Those factors could be your parenting style, because hear me, and this is a whole nother video. I have one in my timeline. You have to be the kind of parent that your learner needs and not the kind of parent that you want to be. All of these different types of parenting, yada, yada, it means nothing if it's not the best way to parent your learner. So you want to make sure that your parenting isn't enabling, isn't preventing your learner from reaching their full capacity, is void of age-appropriate, ability-appropriate correction, right? So real assessment about your parenting and how it's impacting those 3 places. You want to look at your learner in multiple environments. Same thing they do when they do certain assessments. School. Usually they use school, home, and they get the doctor's opinion, but you could use school, home, church, any other, outside place. You want to look at your learner in 3 distinct environments. And the reason we're taking these steps is because you can't advocate or get the educational support you need for a learner that you don't understand. Lots of parents are fighting for resources and tools and different types of therapy, and those things aren't always the best for their learner. And it's because they have not taken the time to fully understand and see their learner, I say on paper, beyond the assessments, the teacher's notes, just your own true thorough assessment. And these steps are how you do that. As a matter of fact, to make this process easier, I'm going to create a quick download with those steps, explaining why it's important and just making it easier for you to go in and fill it out. I just thought about that. Let me make myself a note. Most of us don't go back to school. I know certain places have gone back to school, like Indiana has already gone back. I'm going to get that up, and then I'm going to come back on live in a couple of days and ask you to show up with your download filled out. And then I will provide the next steps. The reason I'm choosing to take it step by step is because sometimes we just get so much information, so much do this, do that, do this, that it's too consuming or too overwhelming for you to actually take in, think over, apply in ways that are impactful. So that's where I'm going to stop for the day. That's your homework assignment. I will make sure you follow me, because I'm going to come back and do an actual post about this homework assignment. I will put the link up with the download. So I'll come back and post the video real quick. I promise I'll have it up today. I know I say that a lot, but y'all have to remember, I'm one of the neurodivergent learners in my house. And sometimes the ADHD absolutely gets the best of me. But the person who thinks he's my 101 is sitting over here in the corner. And I'm going to allow him to hold me accountable. So I'm going to
follow it.
You said I'm going to make it and not follow it. Be quiet. So I'm going to make another post about these steps, about the homework steps. I'm going to put the homework sheet up. I'm going to give you a couple of days to fill out the homework, and then I'll come back on live and we'll go through the homework together, and I'll give you the next steps. Before I jump off, really quick though, are there any pressing questions that someone has that will prevent them from doing their homework? And again, the homework is to create the three sections: where your learner needs the most support, where your learner has the most potential for growth, and the places where your learner is currently doing really well. Then understanding how your learner's diagnosis is impacting them and how other factors like parenting or environment are impacting these three things. That's the homework. Are there any questions about the homework before I jump off, or any questions in general? Somebody had a question around IEP earlier. If you're just joining, I have done it all: homeschool, charter school, private school, public school. We're currently homeschooling our 16-year-old. He runs a successful 6-figure business. He has disabilities. He's impacted by a traumatic brain injury. That business also currently employs 10 other individuals with disabilities. I also have a learner on the spectrum who's headed to college in 2 weeks. Prepare for me to cry. So I've spent the last 15 years working in various types of education and supporting individuals with disabilities. We currently run programs right now around employment, and that's what we use Cam's Coffee to do. So if you have any questions around any of those things, I'll hang out for a little bit just to answer those questions. Again, make sure you follow me so you can get the homework and so that you can be part of the next conversation. I will also post, when I put up the post about the homework, when the live will happen about that. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any around IEPs or homeschooling individuals with disabilities, or even running a social entrepreneurship. Our social entrepreneurship's focus is employment for individuals with disabilities. And we use a coffee shop to do that, but it does not have to be a coffee shop. Let's see. I have a 10-year-old with ASD, IEP, and a school, and have poor support. I can't tell you how many families I support in that process. And truly, without knowing all of the details, the only thing I can say is then you need to have your own plan for support, right? If you know that the education that your learner is receiving is inferior or not sufficient, then you have to think outside of the box of how you can support that education And it begins with the homework steps that I just laid out. So you can then move on, which is going to be the continuation of the process, to understand what the education needs to do. Then you can show up and ask for changes to IEP goals. There are ways for you to get different types of support as it relates to therapies based on the educational path that you have identified. Sometimes, depending on a school. Now, let me say this. Just because a school is providing poor support doesn't mean they're doing the best that they can. So sometimes you do need an advocate to step in and help you navigate that process to identify places where the support could be better and your kid is just not getting the best from that particular school. Does that make sense? But without knowing the specifics, the school system, all the things, it's hard for me to give very specific advice, but that would be where I would start. Start with those two things. Yes, you can absolutely DM me if you get stuck around the goals that you want to identify. If you have some questions around what kind of goals based on your learner, diagnosis, ability level, and potential capacity, absolutely DM me. I'm happy to jump in and help. Okay, I'm in NC. Okay, so we're in the same state. You're in NC, I'm in NC. And the only thing that I would say about switching to private schools is just always remember that private schools are not required to provide special education, right? Now, there are some private schools that's their thing. But in general, private schools are not required to provide special education. And we actually got kicked out of private school for that reason. They accepted my youngest son in when he was, what was he, 8 or 9? He was around 7 or 8. They took him in knowing his deficits, knowing his challenges, and eventually the school decided to put him out because they just weren't equipped to support him. And hear me, legally, there's nothing you can do. There are no legal requirements for private schools to provide special education, which is one of the reasons that so many people are opposed to certain types of school vouchers, because it removes all of the safety supports, all the safe nets, all of the federal requirements around educating a student with disabilities. You can take your dollars somewhere else, but those dollars don't necessarily come with the other supports. Does that make sense? Or you're saying public school is pushing him out too? I'm going to be honest. DM me, because we're in the same state. So everything that applies to me applies to you. And I would be curious to know more about your particular learner and then look at some of the options that may exist that you may not be tapping into and that you may not be aware of. So absolutely DM me, because I live in North Carolina also. And let's sit down and see if we can't figure out what we can do, especially since I think you said you did receive did you receive the grant in our state or no? Because that'll also make some decisions. So instead of us talking about it here, because I have lots of questions, absolutely DM me and let's sit down. We'll schedule something where we can actually get on a call and let's talk about some of the options, what you're experiencing, and what I think could work for your learner. You did receive the grant. Absolutely send me a message. Send me a message and let's get together and try and figure out some additional options for your learner. Our state already had the voucher system before the voucher system that's just being passed, right? And so our state, North Carolina, is really loose in the definition of what can be done with that money. So because you're in North Carolina, you have more flexibility than somebody somewhere else using a voucher. So let's seriously sit down and think about, do your homework. So when we start to talk, I can see your learner's the 3 areas where you need the most support, where he or she has the most potential and where your learner is currently being successful. Being able to see that helps me to think through what may work for you. Now, some of that is also going to depend on where you live in the state, but our state dollars, our state voucher system, you just send it. As soon as I get off the live, I'll respond. But our state is one of those states that it honestly can be a gold mine in a way, because you can, oh, you're in Raleigh. Oh, you got lots of options. You got lots of options. The Raleigh Cary area, you got lots of options. It's just a matter of sitting down and thinking about your learner and figuring out how to connect you to those options and your long-term plan. What does this education need to produce for your particular learner? So all of that is super important when we start connecting the dots and building the support and the education that you need. But I will absolutely, you can't find a school. I will absolutely respond, and we'll get on something and we'll start to make something shake. I got you. Absolutely. Any other questions around either IEPs, homeschooling learners with disabilities? The question that I get asked the most is, what curriculum do we use? And I'm not loyal to a curriculum because I'm loyal to the process that produces the education that we need. My particular learner does better project-based learning, hands-on learning. He's not the type of kid to sit in front of a computer and do online learning. That's not going to work for us. We've done, like the workbooks, that type stuff, but we get more bang for our buck in projects. Let me give you this example. We did a garden 2 years ago. We had someone come and teach him how to make mulch, everything you need to know to grow food, right? Well, in my state, you can follow the course curriculum, but I get to choose how I identify classes to achieve the classes that are identified and the standards, right? So from that one garden, we actually were able to knock off 2 or 3 things because we used earth science from that garden. We did a health class from that garden because the food that he grew, we then learned how those foods are healthy. And we did home ec because we then took those foods and we cooked them on a regular basis, right? So we took one project, and for a year, that one project was the source of 3 different classes. Because the other thing that we have to do, because we do run a business where we also pull classes from, is we work smarter, not harder. So from that one project, growing a garden for a full year, we worked on 3 different classes. All those classes were science-based, but again, because we homeschool, we may spend one school year doing, something that's predominantly science, and then another year we pick another project. And so we're not necessarily doing multiple subjects all the time. That's another thing when we're talking about educating your learner in a way that best benefits that learner. It's easier for him to kind of stay focused on the same type of learning material at one time. And that may not be true for your learner. Like your learner may have the capacity to do math, science, read, all the different subjects like you would in a traditional environment. That's not true for my learner. So we kind of stay close to the same subject matter for a block of time. And then we move on to another block, if that makes sense. And this is what I've also found. Don't be afraid to do things in a non-traditional way. Just because your learner currently does well the way that you're doing things does not mean that that's the best way to max out their full potential. It's just the way we've always done things, right? And because we've always done things that way, and because we've been told that education happens a certain way, then we just naturally gravitate to doing it that way. My argument is, if you're going to take the time to homeschool, I just put up a handout on the 7 steps if you want to start homeschooling a learner with disabilities. And the first thing I say is break up with the system. Forget the system, because if it was working in its entirety as it should for your particular learner, 9 times out of 10, you wouldn't be homeschooling. I understand that people homeschool for various reasons, but something about that system isn't working for your learner. So pull away from it and begin to think outside of the box about education based on your learner. And how does that start? With the steps I gave you for homework. Lots of times we can't do that because we don't fully understand the learner. Do we understand the education that they're getting isn't working? Are we unhappy about something? We absolutely do. But what we haven't done is taken the time to figure out why it's not working. What about your learner could be different, needs to be different. The environment, the way education is presented, all the things. But you have to first sit down and understand the learner. Okay, before I jump off, I'm going to run you through the homework one more time. Your homework is to sit down, if you have a learner with disabilities, is to sit down and put your learner in 3 categories. The places where your learner, and hear me, this isn't education only. This is everything about your learner. I want to be clear. This isn't about where he is in math or reading, because education should shape everything. This is all of your learner in its entirety. Where does your learner currently need the most support? Where does your current learner currently have the most potential? These are things that your learner may not have fully accomplished or may not be doing well, but they have, for the most part, the tools and the capacity with the right support to do well in these places. And then where are the places that your learner is currently thriving? So you can see what's going great, what's iffy, and what's not on the right track, right? Write those things down in those categories. Then you want to sit and think about your learner's diagnosis, the categories that we just talked about. What about your learner's diagnosis or disabilities is directly impacting these things? And then what other factors are impacting these things? Is it education? Is it therapy? Is it family support? Is it parenting? And that's one of those places where you have to be honest with yourself. Are there certain things happening in these categories because of, as we can do as parents, because we're enabling? Are there certain things happening in these categories just because life is lifing right now? Right? The reason that's important, because you've got to know why things are happening in order for you to provide support, correction, whatever it is. You have to understand the why. So lots of times we are seeing things, but we don't understand or have not connected them to the source. Does that make sense? So that's your homework. As I stated, I'm going to put those steps in a checklist or in a worksheet for you to be able to fill out. I will come back later today and put up a video with the link to download the worksheet, and also commit to the next time that I'm going to go live to go over that worksheet with you and to give you the next steps. Hear me. I do the best I can. And the reason I'm so sporadic with the lives is because I'm doing this in real life. We run Cam's Coffee. We have employees that we're supporting. We're opening another location. And so my life is life. And that's how I don't understand how people are able to get on here and do this that much. But anywho, thank you. I'm glad you got something out of it. And I'm going to respond to your DM so we can get something going for you. That's your homework. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have not followed me, please go over and follow. If you need the additional support, in my bio, you'll find the link to Empowered Pathways, where I have all the resources. I did not mention, but I even have a tool where you can put in goals from your IEP, and it will give you real life things to do related to independence, entrepreneurship, any area you want to grow in. It'll take an IEP goal and help you create something that you can do at home to support the kind of growth that you want to see. Okay? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll get that information up, and I look forward to talking with you more on part 2. Make sure you get your homework done. I'll put the worksheet up. Have a great remainder of your Saturday.